Hello Pokemon fans, I'm Professor K, and welcome back to another Professor's Corner. I'm going to show you guys today my Donphan deck that won me 3rd place in the City Championship. A lot of you guys have been waiting for it, a lot of you guys have been asking for it, and it's finally time to disclose what exactly is in this deck list that made it do so well in the City Championships in Maitland, Florida, 2 weeks ago now actually, as a matter of fact. So, figure it's time to go ahead and disclose it to you guys and show you what makes the deck tick. Let's get right into it. Alright guys, we're back and let's go ahead and take a look here at the Pokemon lineup for this Donphan deck. Now, it doesn't really look that much different from a standard Donphan deck at first. We got 4 Phanpy here, obviously a standard number considering it is a Donphan deck, that's your main attacker. So you got to start off with as many Phanpy as possible so that you can evolve straight into Donphan here. That way you can start immediately using Spinning Turn as fast as possible for 1 fighting energy, obviously doing 40 damage. If you got a strong energy, it's 60, Muscle Bane you're doing 80, Silver Bangle possibly 90. It's just a lot of damage really fast on turn 2 once you can evolve anyways. So there's 4 Donphan there. Your main attacker most of the time. You're going to want to use Spinning Turn to go into other things, and those other things can be things like, well, these aren't necessarily Pokemon, but they count as Pokemon, so Robo Substitute. Robo Substitute, I've got 3 copies of it in this deck. Being able to Spinning Turn into these Robo Substitutes is actually really good because it forces your opponent to knock out a Robo Substitute, or you waste a Lysander to get it out of the active spot, and they don't get to take any prizes when they knock this out, so it's an amazing thing to use Spinning Turn to go into. Alongside of that, you've got other possible walls, such as 1 copy of Sigilyph here. Sigilyph has Safeguard, prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to this Pokemon by Pokemon EX. So those big Pokemon EX decks that you can face, like Virizion Genesect or Yveltal, they can't hurt Sigilyph unless they get around him somehow with a Lysander or something like that, Pokemon Catcher, whichever. And it's really good in those kind of matchups. So you can Spinning Turn into Sigilyph if you so choose to. There's also some other options here. We've got some Outrage Pokemon like Reshiram here. Outrage, 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So you can force your opponent to hit this Pokemon here, add up some damage, slap a double colorless energy on him, and you're able to deal out tons of damage. Considering that he's got 130 HP, it's really hard to knock out with 1 hit, so putting these Outrage Dragons up front can actually be really good. Counterpart to Reshiram, here is a Zekrom. Zekrom, another one, 130 HP, same exact principle, just that type difference though. Yveltal, being able to use Zekrom against him can be really, really big. That electric weakness on Yveltal could be a 1-hit knockout if you put any damage on this Zekrom. Same thing goes with Virizion Genesect or Steel when you use Reshiram. The final card here is what makes this deck a little more interesting than some of the others. As opposed to going with the standard Kyurem, I actually chose to go with Kyurem EX. This Outrage attack here does 30 damage more. Plus 10, I should say. 30 damage plus 10 for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Considering that's 180 HP, you can do a ton of damage if they keep hitting this Kyurem and can't knock it out. Granted, this is the only card in the deck that's going to give up 2 prizes, but this card single-handedly let me win in my top 8 match because my opponent miscalculated the damage, thinking that Outrage was 20 plus, and didn't realize he was going to get 1 hit knocked out on the next turn, and it actually won me that game. It was against a Charizard Pyroar. So, there's your Pokemon lineup. That's it. Straight up, simple, and easy. I chose not to run Hawlucha in this deck. I didn't run more Sigilyph. I just stuck with my Robo Substitutes, my 3 Dragons, and my Sigilyph here. And, well, I mean, when it comes down to it, consistency is everything, and this is a very simple build. And I was the only Donphan deck in top 8, and it did well for me. There was other Donphan there was Yveltal, there was Gengar, there was all kinds of things. So it was the standout deck in this case. Go on to the supporter lineup here. It's a little less than most as far as standard decks go. I choose to run 3 copies of Professor Juniper. A lot of decks run 4. Being able to discard your hand, draw 7 new cards, very good draw support. I run 3 copies of N. Again, another card that a lot of decks run 4 of. I chose to run 3, and it obviously worked. 2 copies of Colress, because you're always going to want to have a big bench, and Colress can get you a lot of cards in a short period of time. I mean, Donphan gets a lot of Pokemon on the bench quick, and your opponent most of the time will have a few, so Colress is a good card to have unless it's on your first turn most of the time. So that's my draw support, honestly. Just 8 draw supporters. The next thing I chose to run was 2 copies of Karina. Again, 2 copies doesn't seem like a lot, and I'll kind of show you why I chose to run 2 here as we progress in this deck profile. But 2 copies of Karina worked for me very well, being able to get a fighting type Pokemon, Phanpy or Donphan, and an item card is really, really good, and well, you just can't beat Karina in the fighting type decks. My last supporter in the deck, 2 copies of Lysander. Being able to get anything up off your opponent's bench into the active position is always good. Free Pokemon catcher, just gotta waste your supporter for the turn, and you don't gotta flip for it, so definitely better than the standard item-based Pokemon catcher in that instance. Again, consistency is everything. We've got 3 copies of VS Seeker. This is why my supporter count is so low. I was able to use this VS Seeker and reuse Karina, reuse Lysander, reuse Colress and Juniper, whatever I wanted. I was able to reuse it so many times. I did not face Seismitoad, so that was probably a big factor in why that worked so well. Then, of course, I've got item-based draw support as well in the form of Bicycle. Draw cards until you have 4 cards into your hand. A lot of times you're going to have a small hand size with Donphan, so Bicycle is a really good card. Plus, you can Karina for it as well if you don't need any other item cards besides, you know, maybe a Robo Substitute or Floatstone or whatever. Bicycle is obviously really good draw support as well alongside these other support cards. In order to get your Outrage Dragons, your Sigilif out of the active position so you can go back into Donphan and Spitting Turn, big card to have here is Floatstone. Floatstone gives you free retreat cost on whoever it's attached to, and it definitely wins a lot of games for Donphan if you get them out and you don't get them knocked away. Fortunately for me, I did not see a single Enhanced Hammer or a single Startling Megaphone the entire tournament. That was 7 rounds in the beginning, and then I played top 8 and top 4, so that's 2 more. In 9 matches, I did not see a single Enhanced Hammer and not a single Startling Megaphone. It's kind of crazy. To help power up your Pokemon's attacks, 2 Muscle Band and 2 Silver Bangle. Being able to do 20 damage more to everybody and 30 more damage to Pokemon EX is really, really good and helped me win a lot of matches, getting those magic numbers that you need for Donphan to knock out your opponent's Pokemon. I wanted to run mostly Muscle Band, but at the last second threw together some Silver Bangles and it worked out really well for me. As a matter of fact, I was discussing a lot of this deck build with HappyGengar before the tournament started, and some of his suggestions I kind of threw out the window at the last second because I was just really tired, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it my way. I threw this list together at the last second and just went with it with no playtesting. It actually worked out, but most of the time it doesn't. Got 2 copies of Ultra Ball here. I chose to run these in place of Enhanced Hammers for consistency purposes, and I'm so glad that I did. Had I not, I may not have been able to get Pokemon when I needed them, so definitely Ultra Ball was the call in that case. Run 1 switch because you never know when you might get stuck in the active position. It happened to me at least once that I can recall, and it definitely helped save me there. So you need at least 1 switching card in this deck, even though Donphan does have Spinning Turn into something else. 1 copy of Professor's Letter. This is not a high energy count deck, but when you need energy, you can get 2 of them right away with a Professor's Letter, so it's definitely important to have. 1 copy of Startling Megaphone. Garbodor is maybe not as prominent as it used to be, but it does shut off Safeguard, so getting rid of Floatstones or whatever tools are attached to Garbodor is always good. And also getting rid of your opponent's, let's say, Muscle Bands, Silver Bangles, whatever they have attached, helps get rid of them as well. So 1 copy of Startling Megaphone is really all that's needed in this deck. My ace spec of choice is another one that's interesting, considering that Donphan has a second attack here, Wreck, for 2 colorless and 2 fighting. It's kind of a high energy attack, and you've got, let's say, Reshiram here in the active position with a double colorless attached. You don't necessarily want to use him anymore, but you can't really do anything with him, and you want to get rid of that double colorless. Here's what you do. Scramble Switch. You can Scramble Switch, get that energy off of Reshiram, put it onto a Donphan, and potentially Wreck for a huge amount of damage. It works out really well in a lot of instances, and I would recommend it highly as an ace spec in this kind of a deck. I didn't get to use it a whole lot, but when I did, it really hit hard. It was definitely unexpected. So that's another little mystery card in there that made this deck stand out from the rest of them in this particular tournament. Now, my card that I chose to run in place of a third Karina was actually a third Fighting Stadium. Wreck only works if there's a stadium in play for that extra damage on top of the usual 80. And, well, it saved me a lot, because we have to discard this stadium card that's in play when you use Wreck. And I had to Wreck in a couple instances more than once. So these Fighting Stadiums really helped save me in this tournament against a lot of different deck variations. The surprise Wreck was a big factor. In the energy count here, that's it for the items there. The energy count, all I ran was 4 fighting energy, 4 strong energy, and 4 double colorless. That's it, 12 energy. I never was energy starved. I never had any problems with it. It set up every time, and it worked for me every time. I just guess it's a combination of luck and consistency and the way the deck is built. It just worked out in the long run, and I didn't have to really worry about energy. I don't think 5 is a good number. I think it's too much, and this is a very tightly packed deck. Obviously, it's got a lot of stuff in it. It has a lot of Pokemon in it, even if you don't think it does. I mean, just Phanpy and Donphan alone take up 8 spaces. You got 3 Robos that count as Pokemon. You got 4 there. You got Outrage Dragons and Sigilif. It's definitely a tightly packed deck, and to make it work, you kind of have to sacrifice some things and use it for consistency purposes, because when you build a deck, always build it with consistency in mind, because the more times you can complete the object of your deck, if your goal is to do something, you're able to do it 90% of the time, 80% of the time, 70% of the time, it's still much better than throwing in tech cards here and there for different matchups, because you're always going to lose to something. It's really just a matter of chance when it comes to those kind of situations. You have to run for what the deck does best with. And that's really the best advice I can give to anyone that's building a deck. But in this instance, here's the Donphan deck. Do with it what you will. Tweak it, copy it, whichever you'd like to do. It doesn't even make a difference at this point. I just want to share with you guys what I used and how successful it was for me. And maybe you can build your own deck with this kind of knowledge now in mind, with your supporter counts, your items, your energy, your Pokemon, just to give you a basic idea if you're new to the game. And hopefully you guys appreciate it. I would also appreciate your guys' feedback and support in the comments section down below. Let me know what you think of this deck, and let me know what you guys are running as well. Always interested in knowing what the fans are using out there as well. If you liked the video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Plenty of more TCG content coming your way really soon. So until next time, guys, I'm Professor K for the Pokemon Evolutionaries. See you next time.